Nothing endures without harmony. And harmony only endures through us. We are unmoving like the mountain. We will not be drowned by the raging river. Behold the wonders of the Celestial Dragon Empire. The might of our warriors. The secrets of our alchemists. The sorcery of the dragon-blooded. Vanquish chaos with the sheer power of the dragon. Let them face the majesty of Grand Cathay.
Well, hello there. Welcome back, my friends, as the Far East train rolls ever onwards, oh so slowly, and the drip feed doth continue. Today we are entering the world of Grand Cathay, and at first glance, it may not seem like there's a whole lot of new content to digest here, but perhaps there are some interesting tidbits we can glean from the footage. Naturally, we are continuing the fierce rivalry between the demonic cults of Qianqi, the Great Deceiver, and the combined might of Miss Cold and Aloof, and Mr. Gregarious Mutant Alchemist Dragon thing. So as the trailer gets underway, it looks like we are once again headed to the Great Bastion. You see that gigantic fortification in the background, surrounded by natural barriers and cliffs on both sides, and aesthetically I'd say most of what we've seen from Cathay so far is quite beautiful. You'll notice the floating gardens, temples, and watchposts above look a lot like the Hallelujah Mountain Range on Pandora from James Cameron's Avatar, and that's intentional, because those visuals were heavily inspired by the Zhangjiajie Southern Sky Column in Hunan Province, south-central China. So they're taking a lot of the more majestic elements from Chinese geography, architecture, and culture, and incorporating those into Warhammer Fantasy, which is cool to see, and I'd argue pretty expected as well. So as we take a look at the siege layout down below, in contrast to the footage we saw in the announced cinematic, this fortress is very similar to ones we've seen in Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2. Single set of walls, one angle and avenue of attack, very choke-pointy streets, not much change in elevation, because I don't think the portion nearest the Great Wall in the back of the map will be playable, and not much room to maneuver from what we can see from this bird's eye view. Doesn't necessarily mean anything. This is not a hands-on gameplay for siege battle, so don't get it twisted, but I would be remiss if I did not point that out. Now in the foreground, we actually have a new unit variant, Barted Longboat Cavalry, which will presumably be a higher tier version of the unarmored flyers shown in earlier trailers and screenshots. Now that isn't always the case. Kislev has had a few examples already, where a unit that showed up in screenshots and trailers would not be in the final game, like the Brown Bear Cav with their own armor sets seem to have been completely replaced by polar bears and will not be in Warhammer 3 in any capacity at the moment, so it could be a similar situation here, but both the armored and the unarmored variants are seen throughout this trailer, so let's operate on the assumption that they are distinct units. Longma quite literally means dragon horse, and they are pretty much exactly as depicted, Pegasus with dragon scales, and in Warhammer 3, Barted Longma Cavalry will be Cathay's answer to Royal Pegasus Knights from Bretonnia. Tier 3 and Tier 4 flying cav armed with long spears, perfect for winning an aerial duel against a high-value threat like a Lord of Change, or rear-charging enemy mounted troops on the ground. Unfortunately, this is not a unit archetype that has historically been very good in this series. They are quite niche, with only a handful of useful applications, namely the two I just listed, and they're typically only brought if you want to guarantee aerial supremacy in a particular battle, which has its uses in both campaign and multiplayer, but isn't a super common area of need. Flying Cav tends to suffer a lot when they get on the ground, because they simply don't have the mass, models, or HP pool to survive being tied up for very long. The Barted variant should certainly be tankier than even the Bretonian elite, just based on how much lamellar armor they're wearing here, but I'd be surprised if they had the same punching power on the charge. 1v1, Royal Pegasus Knights should beat the brakes off them, and those are already kind of a niche glass cannon type unit, so I'll be curious to see how much play the Longma variants see on opening day. If balance remains similar to what it is now, and they aren't given a reliable method of escape, My guess is probably not very much, but they do look very cool, so there's that. As we pan over the initial set of ramparts here, we can see the rocket batteries opening up, and it does appear that the ornate dragon artillery that I thought could be some kind of grand bombard are indeed just rockets. So perhaps no howitzers, cannons, or big-ass mortar shell artillery, might just be Cathay's Hellstorm rocket battery equivalent. In the front ranks, we have the first of many Jade Warrior variants, and throughout the trailer we'll see around 3 or 4 weapon configurations for them, and a handful of other infantry regiments as well. They've got the lamellar armor and high collar for protecting their necks from decapitation, and some fancy looking polearms, what look like crescent-bladed G from the Song Dynasty. Nothing crazy special here, just a tier 3 heavy halberd unit meant for holding the line, but this is where things start getting very interesting. Pink Horrors are unleashing their ranged attack, a mortar strike from downtown, and as the flames begin their descent towards Cathay's ranks, a mage of some sort summons a protective spell and prevents them from making impact. Now that could just be artistic license for the trailer, but I feel like that would be somewhat misleading, and it's a really cool mechanic, so the optimist in me says that will indeed be in Warhammer 3 in some capacity, and at the risk of reading too much into it, I would very much love to see defensive magic for every lore of magic in the game that can prevent at least some low-tier spells or range attacks from hurting your forces. We already know both range damage and spell damage have been OP for a very long time, and simply don't have proper counters in place. Even armor and missile block chance often doesn't do enough. You'll still take a lot of damage from focus fire from regular archers that don't have armor piercing with your iron breakers, which is kind of dumb. So with the current lack of a dispel system, or defensive magic in general, that can prevent missile attacks from hurting your forces, maybe the kind of thing that could block a Sister of Avalorn volley once or twice in a battle, or summon a bubble of nope to utterly stuff up a Searing Doom, that kind of thing would be a super nice addition, so perhaps that's what they're hinting at here. Could just be exclusive to a single spell for Cathay, could be a hint towards a more sweeping rework of magic, could just be artistic license for an ability that functions more like Shield of the Old Ones, where the range attack isn't literally blocked like we see here, but rather just mitigated with a ward save of some sort, but only time will tell. What's also interesting is that we now have confirmation of 3 distinct mage types for Cathay. You'll notice the model of this chick is exactly the same as the Lord character in CA's concept art released a few weeks back, and we got the names of the other 2 mages later in this trailer, so we know those are distinct mages. Alchemists are the female hero characters, straight out of Ba Sing Se, bending earth and metal and painting a bloody picture amongst the Forsaken, and dragon-blooded Shugengan wizards are the male characters, creating tornadoes and lightning strikes with some seriously flashy attack animations. Both Alchemists and Dragon-blooded are explicitly mentioned in this trailer, and they are almost certainly hero characters, so the female Lord level character is likely an Astromancer of the same coven that summoned the Great Maw down upon the Ogres all those centuries ago. So Astromancer, Lord level character, Alchemist, and Dragon-blooded hero level casters. And then the melee guy leading regiments into battle is either a Lord or a hero level specialist focused on CQB and buffing up troops using the Harmony mechanic, and he'll be your frontline brawler helping out your guys. You may also notice that Tzeentch mortals are almost entirely absent from this trailer, barring a handful of the warriors on discs you see in the far distance, still rocking the generic Undivided Aspiring Champion and Chaos Knight models we had 5 years ago. And given that this trailer wasn't set in stone for October 1st, until a couple of days beforehand, it would not shock me if there were some last minute changes being made due to the Tzeentch recolor backlash. I have no idea if anything will change on that front going forward, but we do know that Creative Assembly has heard the community and acknowledged it, so hopefully we will not be seeing simple recolors for Chosen and Disc Knights when it is Tzeentch's turn in the limelight. Behold, the Grand Majesty of the Terracotta Sentinel, which has some crazy new animations where he spins the glaive like a helicopter blade and stomps demons out of existence. Pretty cool guy, doesn't afraid of anything. Quite a dexterous individual for a statue so large and in charge, and a huge set of weapon variants visible in this picture right here. Citizen Levy or peasants in the foreground with pitchforks essentially. Celestial Dragon Guard Elite on the left in the yellow. Sword and Board Jade Warriors in the center, and behind them Elite Crossbows with yellow horsetail helmets behind them, and the Halberd Jade Warriors in the back. So a pretty massive selection of infantry to choose from when we consider all the concept art that's been released to the public thus far and all the things we've seen in trailers across the board. There are a lot of infantry variants on the Cathay roster, which seems a decent way to pad things out and get some variety going. All things considered, it feels somewhat subdued on the fantasy side, doesn't it? Less fantastical creatures than I initially would have guessed anyway, mostly focused on the human elements for launch, and then maybe saving more of the high fantasy stuff as centerpiece models for DLC later down the line, which is a logical way to handle it, I guess, because as we know, human and human-like factions tend to be the most played in this trilogy, evidenced by the Empire and the High Elves in Game 1 and Game 2 respectively. They're usually the most popular. With that said, there are still fantastical elements in this roster, and the siblings Miao Ying and Zhao Ming are indeed the best examples of that. Now, we did receive confirmation they are not the only two offspring of the Celestial Dragon Emperor. There is a Jade Dragon, likely the commander of the East in Cathay's Grand Fleet, and so it stands to reason there's probably at least one more who rules over the South. In this trailer, we can see both the Storm Dragon and the Iron Dragon transform on a whim in the midst of battle. Probably a short cooldown associated with that transformation. I'd be surprised if there wasn't some kind of limiting factor to prevent the jankiness that would arise from constant shapeshifting and dodging all kinds of incoming spells and all that. But finally, in Game 3, we're getting a look at what a true transformation of Kadan would be like in the lore, turning the caster themselves into a monster rather than summoning them out of the dirt. I think a fair assumption here is that the human form is meant for casting spells, while the dragon form is meant for ripping stuff up in melee and using breath attacks, and that will encourage players to not spend all their time as a flying serpent of doom. Sure, you will have plenty more killing power as a dragon, but you won't be able to utilize the full lore of magic while flying around. You'll need to enter human form to cast, so if I was creating the game, that's probably how I would handle it. It's weird though, because the design for these characters is somewhat at odds with the level system that's currently in place for Legendary Lords in Game 1 and Game 2. You can't really give these characters access to their dragon forms at level 1 because they will be utterly brokenly OP in the first 20 to 30 turns of campaign, maybe even past that. No one has access to hybrid caster dragon lords that early. But at the same time, being a dragon is quite literally what makes these characters who they are, what they're all about, besides, being cold and aloof. So perhaps a bit of a catch-22 on the design side is how do you treat their dragon form just like any other high-level mount? Do you just give it to them like at level 17, make it unlockable then, thereby preserving early game balance, but forcing both characters into a scenario where they literally can't use the things that make them special for a big chunk of the playthrough? Or do you give them their shapeshifting abilities right away and make them significantly stronger than just about any other lord in the series at level 1? There might not be a simple answer to that question, and you might say, well, Manfred doesn't get Purple Son of Xerius right away, but that isn't really what makes that character who he is. He is a caster lord, sure, but he has access to plenty of spells very early on. If you are the offspring of the Celestial Dragon Emperor, not being able to turn into a dragon straight from the word go is weird, but then again, allowing it to happen that way means almost assuredly they'll be OP. Overall, I like what we're seeing from Cathay. They seem to be an interesting and unique faction, but I will say this trailer did not blow my mind in the slightest. Ideally, I think these Enter the World trailers should always showcase something that we haven't seen yet, and in this case, I think it would have been a good opportunity to show off the Wuxing War Compass or another unit like that, and just give us an idea of how those things work and function. Just like the blog posts, I don't think this particular trailer gave us much in the way of new intel, which wasn't really the case with the Kislev trailer, because that's when we got Kastaltin info as a second Legendary Lord, and a look at some new units that hadn't been previously shown off. In terms of the unit roster itself, it certainly feels like the vast majority has already been established, either through concept art or blog posts or the official trailers. I mean, obviously we haven't seen everything in action yet, but I don't think there will be very many surprises when the final roster is unveiled in the next several weeks. I don't know that's when it's coming, I'm just assuming that's when it is. I think they'll probably follow up pretty soon, but hell if I know, this whole marketing cycle has been quite bizarre, as I'm sure most of you guys are aware of by now. I certainly hope I'm wrong on that front, and there will be plenty more stuff shown and unleashed that we haven't seen yet, but I'm going into this one with somewhat reserved expectations, and it's probably a smart play for you guys as well. Ultimately, I'm at the point where I want to start seeing functional improvements to mechanics and core features. I don't think that needs to be rushed, but at the same time, we've been waiting 5 years. Something, a little bone thrown out there for us would be pretty nice to pick at. I like unit rosters, I like faction spotlights, I like all that stuff. I want that to continue, obviously, but There's only so many ways you can repackage the same info and drip feed these tiny reveals. I'd like to see the Siege overhaul and what that entails finally. I'd like to see the campaign map. I'd like to see what improvements are being made to make Warhammer 3 the best in the trilogy and a fitting conclusion to the story. Hopefully we'll get there soon, and hopefully you will be there to join me on that journey. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next video. Indie Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.